The last thing Grasha saw before they tore down her tent was her mother's face, hard as winter stone, empty of all the warmth that had once lived there. The clan elders stood in a half-circle around the dwelling she had sown with her own hands, their expressions carved from the same unforgiving rock, and when her mother stepped forward with the ceremonial blade to cut the first support rope, Grasha felt something break inside her chest that had nothing to do with canvas or cord. "You brought shame," her mother said, and those 3 words held more weight than all the possessions now being stripped from Grasha's life. "You lie with an enemy who leaves you with a half-blood child and no honor. You are no daughter of the Ironjaw clan." Grasha clutched the bundle against her chest, feeling the warmth of her 2-month-old son through the worn blanket. Little Keth made a small sound, not quite a cry, as if he too understood that their world was ending. She wanted to argue, to explain that the human traitor had promised to return, that he had spoken words of love beneath the stars, that she had believed him when he said their different bloods did not matter. But the words died on her tongue because she had been a fool, and they all knew it. The tent collapsed with a sound like a dying breath. Grasha watched as they gathered her tools, the bone needles her grandmother had carved, the skinning knives her father had gifted her before the fever took him, the small loom she had spent 3 seasons building. Her name, Grasha Ironjaw, was struck from the clan records before her eyes, the shaman burning the parchment that proved she had ever existed among her people. "You have until sunset to be beyond our territory," the eldest said. His name was Vorak, and he had once bounced her on his knee and called her little wolf. Now he looked at her as though she were something that had crawled from beneath a stone. "If you are seen after dark, you will be treated as a trespasser and dealt with accordingly." They left her standing in the grass with nothing but the clothes on her back, the blanket wrapped around Keth, and a water skin one of the younger orcs had dropped at her feet when the elders were not looking. Grasha did not know who had shown that small mercy, but she whispered a blessing for them anyway. The sun was already past its peak. She had perhaps 4 hours. Grasha walked west because that was the only direction that made sense. East was the deep wilderness where the great cats hunted. North was the territory of the Bloodfang clan, who had even less love for outcasts than her own people. South was the way the human traitor had gone, and she would not follow his false promises like a dog seeking scraps. West was the borderlands, where humans had begun to settle in the last decade, carving farms from the wild grass and forest. It was dangerous for an orc to go there alone, but Grasha was already alone in every way that mattered. She walked until her feet ached and Keth began to fuss with hunger. Finding a small copse of trees near a stream, she settled against a trunk and opened her tunic to nurse him. The baby latched on with the fierce determination that was his sole inheritance from his mother's people, his small hands kneading against her skin. His ears were slightly pointed, but not as much as a full-blooded orc child. His skin was a pale green, closer to new leaves than the deep forest tone of her own. His tusks, when they came in, would be small or perhaps absent entirely. "What have I done to you?" Grasha whispered, stroking the soft, dark hair on his head. "Brought you into a world that will hate you for existing." But Keth did not care about the world's hatred. He drank his fill and fell asleep in her arms, trusting and warm, and Grasha felt the fierce love that had sustained her through the clan's growing coldness flare bright again. She would not let him die. She would not let the world grind him to dust. She would find a way to survive, and she would teach him to survive, and somehow that would be enough. She walked until the sun touched the horizon, then kept walking, because she did not know if she had crossed the boundary of clan territory, and she did not want to risk stopping too soon. The grassland gave way to rougher country, scattered with boulders and stands of pine. Her legs trembled with exhaustion. Keth was a solid weight against her chest, precious and heavy. When full dark came, she finally stopped, tucking herself into a space between two large rocks. The night was cold, late autumn sliding toward winter, and she had no way to make fire. She wrapped the blanket more tightly around Keth and curled her body around him, giving him all the warmth she had. She did not sleep. Every sound in the darkness might be a predator, or worse, a hunting party from the clan come to ensure she had truly left. But the night passed without violence, and when the gray light of dawn crept across the sky, Grasha allowed herself to believe she might live another day. The second day was harder. Hunger gnawed at her belly, and she knew her milk would dry up if she could not find food. She walked westward still, scanning the landscape for anything edible. She found a patch of late-season berries and ate them so quickly she barely tasted them, then continued on. By afternoon, she spotted signs of human habitation, a fence line in the distance, the straight edges of cultivated fields. Fear and hope warred in her chest. Humans might give her food, but they were just as likely to drive her off or worse. Still, what choice did she have? She was already dying by degrees out here. She approached slowly, careful to stay visible, her empty hands held away from her body. The farm was modest, a small house of split logs with a barn and a few outbuildings. Chickens scratched in a yard, a cow lowed somewhere out of sight. Everything spoke of hard work and simple living. The door of the house opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall by human standards, broad in the shoulder, with hair the color of dry wheat and a beard to match. He wore the rough clothing of a farmer, and he carried an axe. Grasha stopped walking. The man stopped too, and they stared at each other across 50 feet of empty ground. "I mean no harm," Grasha called out, her voice rough from disuse. "I am alone. I have a baby. I need food." The man's grip on the axe tightened. She could see him weighing his options, see the fear and uncertainty in his posture. Then his eyes dropped to the bundle in her arms, and something in his expression shifted. "Stay there," he said. His voice was deep and careful. "Do not come closer." He disappeared into the house. Grasha stood in the yard, swaying slightly with exhaustion, while the chickens eyed her with avian suspicion. The man emerged after a long minute carrying a cloth bundle. He approached to within 20 feet, then stopped and set the bundle on the ground. "There is bread and cheese," he said. "And apples. Take it and go." He backed away, and Grasha moved forward, her pride a small dying thing that barely protested the charity. She picked up the bundle, and the smell of the bread nearly drove her to her knees. "Thank you," she managed. "You cannot stay here," the man said, but there was no cruelty in his words, only a weary sort of firmness. "My neighbors would not understand. It is not safe for you." "I know," Grasha said. She wanted to say more, to explain that she knew what she was asking, that she understood the danger to him as well as herself. But Keth chose that moment to wake and begin crying, his thin wail cutting through the afternoon air. The man's expression changed again. "How old?" he asked. 2 months, Grasha said, bouncing slightly to soothe Keth, though it did little good. He was hungry again, always hungry, growing despite the circumstances of his birth. The man was quiet for a moment. Then he sighed, a long sound that seemed to come from the soles of his feet. "There is an old shepherd's hut about 2 miles northwest of here in the hills. It is not much, but it has walls and a roof. No one uses it anymore. You could shelter there for a few days until you decide where to go." "Why would you help me?" The question came out before Grasha could stop it. The man looked at her, and his eyes were gray as winter sky. "Because you have a baby, and it is going to be winter soon, and I am not so far removed from common decency that I can let that happen without trying to help." He paused. My name is Marcus Holloway. I will bring food to the hut tomorrow if you are there. After that, I do not know. I am Grasha. She stopped. She had no name anymore. The clan had taken it. I am grateful. Marcus nodded once, then turned and walked back to his house, and Grasha stood in the yard holding her son and the bundle of food, feeling as though something impossible had just occurred. She found the hut where Marcus had described, a small stone structure built into the side of a hill, with a turf roof and a wooden door that hung slightly crooked on its leather hinges. Inside was a single room with a cold fire pit, a wooden platform that might have once held a bed of straw, and little else. But it was shelter, and after 2 nights in the open, it felt like a palace. Grasha ate half the bread and a third of the cheese, forcing herself to save the rest even though she wanted to devour everything. She fed Keth and changed his wrappings, using a corner of her own undershirt since she had nothing else. Then she lay down on the wooden platform and slept the sleep of the truly exhausted. She woke to the sound of footsteps outside. The light coming through the gaps in the door said it was late morning. Grasha sat up quickly, her heart hammering, every muscle tense to fight or flee. "It is Marcus," a voice called from outside. "I brought supplies." Grasha opened the door carefully. Marcus stood a few feet back, and at his feet was a canvas sack. He looked tired, as though he had not slept well. "There is food in the sack," he said, "and a blanket, and some cloth for the baby." "I have no way to repay you," Grasha said. "I am not asking for payment." Marcus shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "I have been thinking. Winter is 4 weeks away, maybe 5. You cannot stay in this hut through winter with an infant. You will both die. I know." Grasha met his eyes. "But I do not know where else to go. If I had a clan, I would not be here." "Why do you not have a clan?" Grasha looked down at Keth, sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Because I was foolish enough to believe a human could love an orc. Because I bore a child to a man who disappeared like morning mist. Because I brought shame to my people and they cast me out." She expected judgment, but Marcus only looked sad. "The father, gone, long gone. I will not see him again." The words were ash in her mouth. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that made Grasha's breath catch. "I have a bunkhouse on my property. It is small, meant for hired hands, but I have not had the money to hire anyone in 3 years. It is empty. You and the boy could stay there through the winter." "Why?" The question was almost a gasp. "You do not know me. Your neighbors would be furious. They might drive you out as well. My nearest neighbor is half a mile away and he minds his own business. As long as you stay on my property, no one needs to know." Marcus ran a hand through his hair. "Look, I am not doing this out of pure charity. I could use help around the farm. I have been trying to manage everything alone, and it is too much for one person. If you can work, we can call it a fair trade. Room and board in exchange for labor." Grasha stared at him, trying to understand the trap, the angle, the hidden cost. But his face showed only tired sincerity. "You would trust me on your farm, an orc? You have an infant child and you are half-starved. I do not think you are going to murder me in my sleep." A small smile touched his mouth. "Besides, if you wanted to, you probably already would have, considering I showed up alone with supplies." It was true enough. Grasha was weakened by hunger and exhaustion, but she was still an orc, still stronger than most human men. If she had wanted to rob him, she could have tried. "I can work," she said quietly. "I know hunting, trapping, skinning. I know how to preserve meat and tan hides. I know plants which are good for food and medicine. I can sew and mend. I am not useless. Then we have an arrangement." Marcus extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Grasha shifted Keth to one arm and clasped the human's hand with her own. His grip was firm, calloused from labor, warm. "I will show you the bunkhouse," Marcus said. You can settle in today. Tomorrow, we will talk about what needs to be done before the snow comes. The bunkhouse was better than Grasha had dared to hope. It was small, just one room with a loft for sleeping, but it had a real stove for heat and cooking, a table, a chair, and a rope bed frame that Marcus promised to fill with fresh straw. There were 2 windows with real glass, and the door had a bolt on the inside. I will bring straw this afternoon, Marcus said, standing in the doorway as Grasha explored the space with wondering eyes. And more blankets. There are some old dishes in the main house and pots for cooking. I will bring those too. This is too much, Grasha said, her voice thick. It is a bunkhouse that has been sitting empty for 3 years. You are doing me a favor by using it. Marcus paused. There is a well between here and the main house. You can draw water any time, and there is an outhouse about 30 feet that way. He pointed. After Marcus left, Grasha sat down on the floor and wept. She wept for everything she had lost, for the clan that had cast her out, for the father who had abandoned his son, for the terror of the last few days. But she also wept with relief, great shuddering sobs that seemed to come from the bottom of her soul, because for the first time since the tent had come down, she had shelter and the promise of food and maybe, incredibly, a chance to survive. Keth woke and added his voice to hers, and Grasha gathered him close and whispered promises into his soft hair. We are safe now. For a little while, we are safe. Marcus returned in the afternoon with a wagon full of supplies. Straw for the bed, blankets that smelled of cedar and storage, a wooden crate containing dishes and utensils and pots, a sack of flour, another of beans, a crock of lard, onions, carrots, and a small basket of eggs packed in straw. This is far too much for labor I have not yet done, Grasha protested as he unloaded everything. Consider it an advance, Marcus said. Besides, I cannot have you working if you are weak from hunger. It would be poor business. He helped her fill the bed frame with straw and spread the blankets, making a nest warm enough for the coming cold. He showed her how to work the stove, which was a different design than the fire pits she was used to. He brought wood for burning and stacked it neatly beside the door. I usually eat my supper around sunset, Marcus said as he prepared to leave. You are welcome to come to the main house, or I can bring something here, whichever you prefer. I will not intrude on your home, Grasha said quickly. Marcus looked at her, and something in his eyes was sad. It is not an intrusion, but I understand. I will bring food here tonight. He was true to his word. As the sun set, he appeared with 2 bowls of stew, thick with meat and vegetables, and a plate of bread still warm from the oven. They ate in awkward silence, sitting at the small table, Keth sleeping in a nest of blankets on the bed. The work, Grasha said finally, needing to fill the silence with something. What needs to be done? Everything, Marcus admitted. The north fence line needs repair before the snow comes. The barn roof has a leak. I have 3 pigs that need slaughtering and the meat preserved. The garden needs to be fully harvested and the root cellar stocked. Firewood needs to be split and stacked, and that is just the urgent things. I can do most of that, Grasha said. What I do not know, I can learn. You have a baby, Marcus pointed out. You cannot work full days. Orc women do not stop working because of babies. I will manage. She hesitated. But I will need to keep him near. He nurses often. Bring him with you. We will figure it out. Marcus finished his stew and stood. Rest tonight. Tomorrow is soon enough to start. After he left, Grasha cleaned the dishes and sat by the stove, feeding Keth and feeling the strange unreality of her situation. 2 days ago, she had been cast out with nothing. Now she had shelter, food, work, and a human man who showed her more kindness than her own clan had in the final months of her pregnancy. She did not trust it, could not trust it, but she was desperately grateful for it, and that would have to be enough. The work began the next morning. Marcus showed Grasha the fence line that needed repair, and she set to it with a will, using tools he provided and methods he demonstrated. She worked with Keth bound to her back in a sling made from the cloth Marcus had brought, the baby's weight a familiar comfort. The labor was hard but honest. Grasha had always been strong, and despite her recent hardships, her muscles remembered how to work. She dug post holes and set new posts, strung wire, repaired rails. Marcus worked nearby, close enough to answer questions but far enough to give her space. At midday, he brought bread and cheese and apples, and they sat in the shade of a tree to eat. Keth woke and fussed, and Grasha nursed him while Marcus politely looked away, his ears reddening slightly. "You do good work," Marcus said, gesturing to the fence. "Better than I could have managed alone. Fence work is fence work, whether you have tusks or not," Grasha said. A smile tugged at Marcus's mouth. "I suppose that is true." They fell into a pattern over the following days. Grasha worked from dawn until mid-afternoon, then returned to the bunkhouse to care for Keth and prepare a simple meal. Marcus usually brought food from his own kitchen as well, and they began to eat together more often, the awkwardness slowly fading into something almost comfortable. Grasha learned that Marcus was 26 years old, that he had inherited the farm from his father 2 years ago, that his mother had died when he was young, and his father had never remarried. She learned that he had a sister married to a miller in a town 3 days' ride east, and that he saw her perhaps once a year. She learned that he liked his coffee strong and his bread warm, and that he had a habit of humming tunelessly while he worked. Marcus learned less about Grasha, because she volunteered little, but he was observant. He learned that she startled at sudden noises, that she always positioned herself with her back to a wall, that she watched the tree line like she expected enemies to emerge from it. He learned that she sang to Keth in the orc tongue, low, lilting songs that sounded like the wind through stone. He learned that she smiled rarely but laughed even more seldom, and that when she did, it transformed her entire face. The pigs were slaughtered a week after Grasha arrived. She did most of the butchering, her knives moving with practiced efficiency, and Marcus watched in fascination as she broke down the carcasses with minimal waste. They spent 2 days preserving the meat, salting and smoking and rendering lard, working side by side in a companionable rhythm. "Where did you learn butchery?" Marcus asked, stirring the rendering pot. "All orcs learn. If you hunt, you must know how to make use of the kill. Waste is shameful." Grasha packed strips of meat into a crock of brine. "My grandmother was the best butcher in the clan. She taught me." "Do you miss them?" The question was soft. "Your clan?" Grasha was quiet for a long time. "I miss what they were to me before," she finally said. "Before I became a disappointment, but what they became at the end, what they did to me. No, I do not miss that," Marcus nodded, accepting this. "My father used to say that family is the people who stand with you when times are hard. By that measure, your clan stopped being your family when they cast you out." Wise words. He was a wise man, stubborn and set in his ways, but wise. Marcus smiled, the expression tinged with old grief. "He would have liked you, I think. He respected people who worked hard and spoke plainly." "Would he have approved of you harboring an orc?" Marcus considered this. "Honestly, I do not know. He was not a cruel man, but he was not overly fond of orcs either. He had fought in the border skirmishes when he was young, and he carried the scars. But he also taught me to judge people by their actions, not their blood, so maybe he would have. Eventually." The topic of blood and prejudice hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Grasha returned to her work, and Marcus did not press further. The first snow came in early November, a light dusting that melted by afternoon but served as warning. Marcus and Grasha worked frantically to finish the winter preparations. The roof was patched, the wood split and stacked, the root cellar filled. The last of the garden was harvested, and Grasha showed Marcus how to preserve things he had always let spoil, using methods from her clan's long tradition. They fell into a rhythm of domesticity that surprised them both. Grasha cooked meals that were strange to Marcus but undeniably good, using herbs and spices in ways he had never considered. Marcus taught Grasha how to bake proper bread in his oven, and the first time she pulled out a perfect loaf, her expression of delight made him grin like a fool. Keth grew steadily, becoming more alert, more responsive. He began to smile, and the first time he smiled at Marcus, a gummy, joyful expression, the farmer felt something in his chest crack open. He found himself stopping by the bunkhouse more often, always with some excuse, just to check on things. He brought small gifts, always practical. A better pot for cooking, a carved wooden rattle for Keth, a pair of gloves lined with sheepskin for when the weather turned truly cold. "You do not need to bring me things," Grasha said one evening, holding the gloves with wondering hands. "I know," Marcus said, "but I want to. Is that all right?" Grasha looked at him, her dark eyes searching his face for something she could not quite name. "Yes," she said quietly, "it is all right." Winter closed in with serious intent in late November. The snows came heavier, the temperatures dropped, and the farm settled into the quiet rhythm of the cold season. The animals needed tending, the paths needed shoveling, the ice needed breaking on the water troughs, but the frantic labor of autumn had given way to steadier, more manageable work. Grasha and Marcus spent more time indoors. She came to the main house more often now, because it was warmer and more spacious, and Marcus had made it clear she was welcome. They sat by his fire in the evenings, Grasha mending clothes or working small pieces of leather craft, Marcus carving or reading from one of his small collection of books. Sometimes Marcus read aloud, and Grasha listened with hungry attention. She had never learned to read. It was not a skill her clan valued, but she loved the stories. Tales of adventure and heroism, of distant lands and impossible quests. In those moments, with the fire crackling and Marcus's deep voice weaving narratives, Grasha could almost forget the circumstances that had brought her here. Keth became a presence in the house as well. Marcus fashioned a cradle from a drawer and some rope, suspended so it could rock gently. The baby spent his days in the warm kitchen, gurgling and watching the world with increasingly curious eyes. Marcus found himself talking to the infant while he worked, nonsense chatter that made Grasha hide her smiles. "You are good with him," she said one afternoon, watching Marcus hold Keth with surprising competence. "My sister has 3 children. I have some practice." Marcus shifted the baby to his shoulder, patting his back gently. "Though I will admit, I never thought I would be caring for a half-orc infant. Does it bother you?" Grasha kept her voice neutral, but tension gathered in her shoulders. "No," Marcus said, and the simplicity of the word made something in Grasha relax. "He is just a baby, a person. The fact that he has pointed ears does not change that. Most humans would not see it that way." "I am not most humans," Marcus met her eyes, "and you are not most orcs." The words hung between them, heavy with implications neither was quite ready to examine. December brought the solstice, and with it, a strange sort of celebration. Marcus had always observed the occasion alone with a simple meal and a cup of spiced wine, but this year, with Grasha and Keth in his home, it felt different. He roasted a chicken and made a sweet pudding with dried fruit. Grasha contributed a complex stew that smelled of unfamiliar spices, and together they created a feast that was neither fully human nor fully orc, but something entirely their own. In my clan, we would light fires on the solstice, Grasha said, holding a cup of the spiced wine and watching the flames in the hearth. The largest bonfire you can imagine, tall as a house. We would dance and sing and tell stories of the year past and the year to come. Do you wish you were there? Marcus asked. Grasha turned to look at him, her expression unreadable in the firelight. No, she said. I wish I were somewhere I was welcome, doing those things with people who loved me, but that place does not exist anymore. Perhaps it never did, and I was only too young and foolish to see it. You are welcome here, Marcus said, the words coming out before he could stop them. And you are not foolish. Young, perhaps, but not foolish. I am 20 years old and cast out with a bastard child. That is the definition of foolish. You are 20 years old and surviving against terrible odds while keeping your son alive and healthy. That is the definition of strong. Marcus leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Grasha, what happened to you was not your fault. The man who abandoned you, the clan that cast you out, they are the ones who should bear the weight of shame, not you. Grasha's eyes glistened, and she looked away quickly, dashing at her face with the back of her hand. You do not have to say such things. I am not saying them because I have to. I am saying them because they are true. Marcus hesitated, then added, You have become my friend, Grasha. Perhaps my best friend, which is a strange thing to realize about someone I have known for only 2 months. But it is true, and I think friends should tell each other the truth. Friends, Grasha repeated, tasting the word. Yes, I suppose we are that. She managed a smile, small and fragile. Thank you, Marcus, for everything, for seeing me as a person and not just an orc. Thank you for staying, Marcus said, for trusting me enough to stay. They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the fire and sharing the bottle of wine, while Keth slept peacefully in his cradle, and the winter wind howled outside. It was the best solstice Marcus had celebrated in years, and for Grasha, it was the first time since her exile that she felt something like peace. January brought deeper cold and heavier snows. The farm was locked in winter's grip, the work reduced to the bare essentials of survival. Marcus and Grasha fell into an easy partnership, managing the animals and the household with practiced efficiency. But something was shifting between them, a current that neither could quite name. It showed in small things. The way Marcus's hand would linger when he passed Grasha a cup, the way Grasha's eyes followed Marcus when he moved about the room, the way they sat slightly closer by the fire each evening. It was Grasha who noticed it first, and the realization filled her with complicated dread. She could not afford to care for Marcus as anything more than a friend and employer. She had already made that mistake once, had already trusted a human man with her heart, and it had cost her everything. She could not be so foolish again, but the heart, she was learning, did not much care about logic or self-preservation. Marcus was kind. He was steady. He treated her with respect and genuine warmth. He cared for her son as though Keth mattered, as though a half-orc baby was worth his time and affection. He made her laugh, a rare and precious thing. He listened when she spoke. He saw her, truly saw her, not as an orc or an outcast or a shameful thing, but as Grasha, whole and complete. And she was falling in love with him. The knowledge terrified her. Marcus, for his part, was experiencing his own crisis of understanding. He had not expected to like Grasha so much. Had not expected to find himself watching for her in the mornings, listening for her voice, seeking out her company. He had not expected to find her beautiful, but he did. The strength in her features, the intelligence in her dark eyes, the rare brightness of her smile. He had certainly not expected to lie awake at night thinking about her, wondering what it would be like to touch her hand with intent, to speak words that went beyond friendship. but she had been hurt by a human man before, abandoned and left to suffer the consequences alone. Marcus could not bear the thought of causing her more pain, of making her think he was like the traitor who had used her and discarded her. So he said nothing, did nothing, and tried to convince himself that friendship was enough. The tension between them grew, a living thing that filled the spaces where words failed. It came to a head in late January, during the worst storm of the winter. The snow fell in blinding sheets, and the wind drove the cold through every crack and crevice. Marcus insisted that Grasha and Keth stay in the main house, that it was too dangerous to try to reach the bunkhouse in such weather. They spent the day trapped inside while the storm raged. Grasha paced like a caged animal, her unease palpable. She was not used to being confined, not used to being so close to another person for so long. The intimacy of it, the domestic comfort, was both wonderful and terrifying. By evening, Keth was fussy and overtired, fighting sleep despite Grasha's best efforts. Marcus offered to walk with him, and Grasha, desperate and exhausted, agreed. She watched as Marcus paced the length of the room, bouncing gently, murmuring nonsense words, and slowly, miraculously, Keth's eyes drifted closed. "You have a gift," Grasha said softly as Marcus carefully laid the sleeping baby in his cradle. "Just practice." Marcus straightened, rolling the tension from his shoulders. "My sister's youngest was colicky. I learned patience." They stood on opposite sides of the room, the fire between them, and the air felt charged with something electric and dangerous. "I should sleep," Grasha said, not moving. "You have given me your bed. That is generous." "I will be fine by the fire," Marcus said. "It is warm enough." "Marcus." His name on her lips was different somehow, weighted with meaning she could not speak. "Why are you doing all this? The truth, not the answer about needing help or fair trade. The real reason." Marcus looked at her, and the firelight painted shadows across his face. "Do you want the truth?" "Yes." "Because from the moment you walked into my yard with nothing but a baby and your pride, I saw someone worth knowing. Someone brave and strong and trying so hard to survive against impossible odds. And I thought, if I can help, if I can make this even a little bit easier for her, then I should." He paused. "And then I got to know you, and I realized I did not want you to leave when winter ended. I wanted you to stay, not as a hired hand, not as a charity case, but as someone who belongs here." Grasha's breath caught. "Belongs." "I know I have no right to say this," Marcus continued, the words coming faster now, like he had to get them out before his courage failed. "I know you have been hurt by a human man before, and I would understand if you never wanted to trust one again. But Grasha, I care about you. More than I should, probably, more than is wise, and I hope that maybe you feel something too." The silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. "I am an orc," Grasha finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have a child by another man. I have nothing to offer you." "Why would you want me?" Marcus crossed the room in 3 strides, closing the distance between them. He stopped just short of touching her, his hands raised but not quite making contact. "May I?" he asked, and at her tiny nod he took her hands in his. Her skin was warm, her grip strong. "You are brave," Marcus said, looking into her eyes. "You are resourceful. You are a good mother. You work hard. You make me laugh. You have taught me a dozen things I did not know about farming and living. You sing to your son in the evenings, and it is the most beautiful sound I have ever heard. You are kind, even though the world has been cruel to you. You are everything I did not know I was looking for." He squeezed her hands gently. "I do not care that you are an orc. I do not care about Keth's father. I care about you, Grasha, just you." Tears spilled down Grasha's cheeks, and she made no move to stop them. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I let myself trust before, and it destroyed my life. I know, and I cannot promise that I will never hurt you because people make mistakes, but I can promise that I will never abandon you. I will never leave you to face the consequences of my actions alone. I will stand beside you, for as long as you will let me." Marcus lifted one hand to her face carefully, giving her every chance to pull away, and when she did not, he gently brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "You do not have to answer now. You do not have to answer ever if you do not want to, but I needed you to know." Grasha closed her eyes, leaning into his touch for just a moment. Then she pulled back, not harshly but with purpose. "I need to think," she said. "This is not something I can decide with my heart racing and my thoughts in chaos." "Of course." Marcus stepped back, giving her space. "Take all the time you need." They did not speak of it again that night. Marcus made a bed by the fire, and Grasha took the bedroom, and they lay awake in separate spaces, both staring at ceilings and wondering what the morning would bring. The storm broke by dawn, leaving the world buried in snow and glittering with sunlight. Grasha woke to find Marcus already up, cooking breakfast, acting as though nothing had changed. But everything had changed, and they both knew it. Grasha helped with the morning chores, bundled against the cold, her mind turning over Marcus's words again and again. She thought about the traitor who had spoken sweet lies, who had vanished the moment his wanderlust called louder than his promises. She thought about the way her clan had turned on her, how quickly love had become condemnation. But she also thought about Marcus. About the way he had offered help with no expectation of repayment. About how he had never touched her without permission, never demanded anything, never made her feel lesser. About how he cared for Keth with genuine tenderness. About how he had given her dignity when the world said she deserved none. She thought about the way her heart felt when she heard his laugh, the way she felt safe in his presence, the way she had begun to think of his house as home. By the time evening came, she had made her decision. She found Marcus in the barn, tending the cow. He looked up as she entered, his expression carefully neutral, guarded against rejection. "I have thought," Grasha said without preamble, "about what you said." Marcus straightened, setting aside the brush he had been using. "Yes." "I am afraid," Grasha said. "I am terrified, if I am honest, but I have realized something. I have been afraid since the moment I realized I was pregnant. I have been afraid every day since my clan cast me out. Fear has been my constant companion." She took a breath. "But you make me feel something besides fear. When I am with you, I feel hope. I feel valued. I feel like maybe I could have a future that is not just survival but something more." Marcus's expression shifted, hope dawning in his eyes. "I care for you too," Grasha continued. "I have been trying not to, trying to protect myself, but I do. You are good and kind, and you have shown me more respect than my own people did at the end. I do not know if I can be what you want. I do not know if I even know how to be loved properly. But if you are willing to be patient with me, if you are willing to take this slowly, then yes, I want to try." Marcus's face broke into a smile that was like the sun emerging from clouds. "Slowly is fine. We have time." He held out his hand and Grasha took it, their fingers intertwining. "I will not rush you. We will take this at whatever pace feels right." "I think that pace is very slow," Grasha said, but she was smiling too, tentative but real. "Then very slow it is." Marcus squeezed her hand. "But I am allowed to hold your hand, yes, because I have wanted to do that for weeks." "Yes," Grasha said, and her laugh was startled and joyful. "You may hold my hand." They stood in the barn, holding hands like awkward teenagers, while the cow looked on with bovine disinterest, and the winter sun slanted through the gaps in the walls. It was not grand or dramatic, but it was real, and it was theirs. The weeks that followed were a study in careful courtship. Marcus and Grasha navigated the new dimension of their relationship with a tenderness that surprised them both. They still worked together, still shared meals, still spent evenings by the fire. But now there were small touches, a hand on the shoulder, fingers brushing as they passed objects, sitting close enough that their knees touched. Marcus courted Grasha the way his father had courted his mother, with old-fashioned deliberation. He brought her flowers, even though it was winter and he had to fashion them from scraps of fabric. He carved her a comb from wood, the handle decorated with careful designs. He spoke words of affection and admiration, learning what made her smile and what made her blush. Grasha, in turn, showed her affection in the ways she knew. She cooked his favorite meals. She mended his clothes with extra care, adding small decorative touches. She told him stories of her people, sharing parts of herself she had thought lost forever. She sang for him, not just the lullabies for Keth but the old songs of her clan, ballads of heroes and love and loss. They kissed for the first time in late February, on a day when the sun was bright, and the snow was beginning to show the first signs of softening. They had been working in the barn, and Marcus had said something foolish and Grasha had laughed, and suddenly they were just looking at each other, and the world narrowed to the space between them. "May I kiss you?" Marcus asked, his voice rough. "Yes," Grasha breathed, and when his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet, and everything her first kiss with the traitor had not been. There was no urgency, no grabbing hands, just Marcus's mouth on hers and his hands cradling her face like she was something precious. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard, and Grasha felt tears on her cheeks again. "That was yes," Marcus agreed, resting his forehead against hers. "It was." March brought the first hints of spring. The snow began to melt in earnest, the days grew longer, and the world woke from its winter sleep. With the changing season came a new sort of anxiety for Grasha. She had been on Marcus's farm for 5 months. The winter that had necessitated her stay was ending. What happened now? She did not have to wonder long. One evening, as they sat by the fire with Keth playing on a blanket between them, Marcus cleared his throat. "I have been thinking," he said. "Dangerous," Grasha teased, but her heart was hammering. "I want you to stay," Marcus said bluntly. "Not just for the spring or the summer. Permanently. I want you to stay here with me as my partner in all ways." Grasha stared at him. "Marcus, we have been courting for barely 2 months, I know, and if you think it is too soon, I will wait. I will wait as long as you need." "But I know what I want, Grasha. I want to wake up every morning and see you across the breakfast table. I want to work beside you in the fields. I want to raise Keth with you and teach him everything we know. I want to grow old with you." He reached out and took her hand. "I know what your clan took from you. Your tent, your tools, your name. I cannot give you back what they stole, but I can give you a home. I can give you my name if you want it. I can give you a place where you belong, where you are wanted, where you are loved. Your name." Grasha's voice was faint. "Marry me," Marcus said. "I know it is fast. I know it is complicated. We would have to travel to a town where no one knows us, find a priest willing to perform the ceremony. It would not be easy, but if you want it, I want it." Grasha looked down at Keth, who was chewing on a wooden toy, oblivious to the weight of the moment. She thought about the name she had lost, the identity that had been stripped from her. She thought about the precarious nature of her current existence, how easily it could all vanish. But more than that, she thought about Marcus, about the life they had built together, the partnership they had forged, about how he looked at her like she was someone worth cherishing, about how he loved her son without reservation, about how, for the first time in a year, she felt like she was more than just a survivor. "Yes," she said, and the word was firm and sure. "Yes, I will marry you." Marcus's answering smile was brilliant. He pulled her into his arms, and they held each other while Keth babbled happily. And outside the window, the world continued its slow turn toward spring. The practical matters of arranging a marriage took time. Marcus had a friend in a town 2 days' ride south, a man named Thomas who was open-minded and asked few questions. Marcus sent a letter explaining the situation in vague terms, and Thomas wrote back that he knew a priest who might be willing to help, for the right donation to the church. They set out in mid-April when the roads were passable again. Marcus drove the wagon. Grasha sat beside him with Keth bundled against her chest, and they traveled through countryside that was waking and green. They drew stairs in every settlement they passed through, but Marcus met any hostile looks with a firm jaw and a hand protectively on Grasha's back, and no one challenged them openly. Thomas turned out to be a stocky man with a friendly face and a practical demeanor. He greeted Marcus like the old friend he was and offered Grasha a respectful nod. "Any friend of Marcus is welcome in my home," he said simply. The priest was older, a man who had seen enough of the world to have worn away his roughest edges of prejudice. He agreed to perform the ceremony without fanfare in the small church at dawn when few would see. "I believe love where it is found is a blessing," the priest said, looking at Marcus and Grasha with kind eyes. "And I believe children deserve to grow up in homes filled with that love. So yes, I will marry you." The ceremony was simple. Grasha wore a dress that Thomas's wife had lent her, plain but clean. Marcus wore his best shirt and trousers. They stood before the priest in the quiet church, with Thomas and his wife as witnesses, and they spoke vows that were traditional and yet somehow entirely unique to them. "I, Marcus Holloway, take you, Grasha, to be my wife. I promise to stand with you in all things, to honor you, to care for you and your son, to build a life with you that is worthy of the courage you have shown. I, Grasha, take you, Marcus Holloway, to be my husband. I promise to stand with you in all things, to honor you, to work beside you, to build a life with you that is worthy of the kindness you have shown me." The priest blessed them, and Marcus kissed his wife for the first time, and Grasha felt something settle in her chest that she had not even known was unsettled. She had a name again. She was Grasha Holloway now, and that name was chosen, not inherited, built on respect and love rather than blood and tradition. They stayed 2 days with Thomas and his wife, who welcomed them with warmth and good humor. Then they traveled home, because that was what it was now, officially and completely. The farm woke fully with the spring. Marcus and Grasha worked from dawn to dusk, planting the fields, tending the animals, repairing what winter had damaged. Keth grew stronger, learning to sit up on his own, beginning to eat soft foods in addition to his mother's milk. The world turned as it always did, seasons cycling, life renewing itself. But there were challenges too. In early May, a neighboring farmer came by to trade seed, and his eyes widened when he saw Grasha working in the garden. "Marcus," the man said carefully, his eyes never leaving Grasha's form. "Is that an orc on your property?" "That is my wife," Marcus said, his tone brooking no argument. The neighbor's face went through a complicated series of expressions. "Your wife? Yes, we were married last month. If you have a problem with that, you are welcome to leave." The man opened his mouth, closed it, then shook his head. "I do not have a problem exactly. I am just surprised." "The others might not take it well." "The others can mind their own business," Marcus said flatly. "Grasha is my wife. She lives here. She works here. She is part of this farm. That is not going to change." The neighbor left without completing the trade, and Marcus knew the talk would start. But he found he did not care. Let them talk. Let them think what they wanted. Grasha was his wife, and he would defend her right to exist with every breath in his body. The talk did start, predictably. Some neighbors grew distant. A few made pointed comments. But others, surprisingly, were more accepting than Marcus had feared. The blacksmith, a gruff man who had always been fair, made a point of greeting Grasha respectfully when they went to town for supplies. The woman who ran the general store gave Keth a peppermint stick and told Grasha she had a beautiful baby. "Not everyone is afraid," Marcus said one evening after a trip to town that had gone better than expected. "No," Grasha agreed, "but enough are. We will always be strange to them. Always other." "Does that bother you?" Grasha considered this. "Less than it would have once. I have been other my whole life, Marcus. Other to the humans for being orc, other to my clan for bearing a half-blood child. At least now I am other with you beside me." Marcus pulled her close and she leaned into his strength. "Always," he promised. "I will always be beside you." Summer came in full and hot. The crops grew tall, the animals thrived, and Keth learned to crawl, then to pull himself up on furniture, his determination a mirror of his mother's. Grasha bloomed in the warmth and security, her smiles coming more easily, her laughter more frequent. She was still guarded around strangers, still carried the wariness of someone who had been hurt, but in the safety of the farm with Marcus and Keth, she was happy. Marcus watched his wife with wonder and gratitude. She was everything he had not known he needed. Strong where he was weak, skilled where he was lacking, fierce in her love for their small family. He had thought himself content in his solitary life, but Grasha had shown him what he had been missing. In August, Marcus came home from checking the far fence line to find Grasha sitting in the garden, Keth playing in the dirt beside her, both laughing at something. The sight stopped Marcus in his tracks, filled him with an emotion so powerful he could barely name it. This was his family. His wife, his son, because Keth was his son now in every way that mattered, his home. This was everything. Grasha looked up and saw him standing there, and her expression softened. "What is it?" "I am just happy," Marcus said simply. "I am so incredibly happy." Grasha stood and walked to him, leaving Keth to his explorations, and she took Marcus's face in her strong hands. "So am I," she said. "I never thought I could be after everything, but I am." They kissed in the summer sunlight, while Keth babbled to himself and the chickens scratched nearby, and it was perfect in its simplicity. Autumn came, and with it, a surprise. Grasha realized she was pregnant. The knowledge filled her with complicated emotions, joy and fear tangled together. She told Marcus one evening as they sat by the fire, her voice uncertain. "I am with child," she said. "Your child." Marcus's eyes went wide, and then he was grinning, his face transformed with delight. "Truly, truly. I am perhaps 2 months along." Marcus pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "That is wonderful. That is the best news." "You are not worried?" Grasha pulled back to look at his face. "About what people will say? About raising a child who is part orc?" "No," Marcus said firmly. "Let them say what they will. We will raise this child and Keth with love and teach them to be strong and kind. That is all that matters." Grasha felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, grateful tears. "I love you," she said. The words came easier now after months of practice. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Marcus said. "Always." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Grasha was healthy and strong, and the winter was milder than the one before. They spent the cold months preparing for the baby, setting up a proper nursery, making tiny clothes. Keth, now walking and talking in a mixture of human and orc words, was excited about becoming a big brother, even if he did not fully understand what that meant. Marcus built a cradle with his own hands, carving protective symbols into the wood, both the human charms his father had taught him and the orc runes Grasha showed him. It was a blending of their worlds, and it felt right. In early March, Grasha went into labor. It was long and difficult, but Marcus stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring encouragement. When the baby finally came, a squalling, healthy girl with green-tinged skin and the tiniest points to her ears, Grasha wept with relief and joy. "She is perfect," Marcus breathed, holding his daughter for the first time. "She is absolutely perfect." They named her Mara, a name that existed in both human and orc traditions, meaning strength. Mara Holloway, daughter of Marcus and Grasha, sister to Keth. She was the physical manifestation of their love, the proof that two different worlds could come together and create something beautiful. Spring unfolded, and the farm thrived. Marcus and Grasha managed the work with practiced efficiency, now with 2 children to incorporate into the daily routine. It was chaotic and exhausting and absolutely wonderful. One afternoon in late April, as Grasha nursed Mara on the porch while Keth played with wooden toys at her feet, Marcus sat down beside her and just watched his family. The spring sun was warm, the breeze carried the scent of growing things, and everything was green and alive and full of possibility. "You remember the day you walked into my yard?" Marcus asked. "Every detail," Grasha said. "I was terrified. I thought you would drive me away or worse." "I am glad I did not." Marcus reached out and touched Mara's tiny hand, and the baby's fingers curled around his. "I am glad you stayed. So am I." Grasha looked at her husband, at the man who had given her back her life, her dignity, her hope. "You saved me, Marcus. You and this place." "I was dying when I came here, even if my heart was still beating, and you saved me." "We saved each other," Marcus corrected gently. "I was lonely and did not even know it. You gave me purpose, family, love." He leaned over and kissed her softly. "We saved each other." Grasha could not argue with that. She settled back against the porch post, Mara warm and content in her arms, Keth humming one of the songs she had taught him, Marcus solid and steady beside her. The future stretched out before them, uncertain in its details but bright with promise. She thought, briefly, of the clan that had cast her out. She did not hate them, not anymore. That bitterness had burned away over the months, leaving only a sort of distant sadness for what might have been. But she did not need them. She had built something better here, something that was entirely her own. Her clan had taken her tent, her tools, her name. They had left her with nothing but her baby and the clothes on her back. But from that nothing, she had built everything. A home, a family, a life worth living. And she had learned the most important lesson of all. That worth was not determined by blood or clan or the circumstances of one's birth, but by the love you gave and received, by the family you chose and who chose you in return, by the courage to keep going even when the world said you should give up. The sun moved across the sky, the shadows lengthened, and the Holloway family sat together on the porch of their farm, surrounded by the land they worked and the life they had built. Inside the house, dinner would need to be started soon. The animals would need evening tending. There were always chores, always work, always the demands of survival. But for this moment they simply sat together, a human man and an orc woman and their 2 children, and they were happy. They were home. They were, against all odds and in defiance of a world that said they should not exist, a family. And that was everything. The years that followed were not without their challenges. There were seasons when the crops failed and money was tight. There were illnesses and injuries, the normal trials of farming life. There were neighbors who never accepted them, who whispered behind their backs and taught their children to fear the orc woman and her half-blood children. But there were also seasons of plenty, when the harvest was rich and the animals thrived. There were neighbors who became genuine friends, who saw past the surface to the good people underneath. There were moments of pure joy, Keth's first day helping with the real farm work, Mara's first word, the birth of a 3rd child 2 years later, a son they named Thomas after the friend who had helped them marry. Marcus and Grasha grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They taught their children to be strong and kind, to work hard, to think for themselves. They taught them the best of both human and orc traditions, creating a unique heritage that was entirely their own. Keth grew tall and strong, his mixed heritage giving him the best of both peoples. He became a skilled hunter and farmer, and when he was grown, he married a human woman from a neighboring farm, a girl who saw him for who he was and loved him without reservation. They gave Marcus and Grasha their first grandchildren, and the cycle continued. Mara grew into a fierce and beautiful young woman, proud of her heritage, unashamed of her orc blood. She became a healer, learning medicine from both human and orc traditions, eventually opening a practice in a nearby town where she helped anyone who came to her door, regardless of their blood or circumstances. Thomas, the youngest, inherited his father's steady temperament and his mother's determination. He took over the farm eventually, continuing the work his parents had begun, raising his own family on the land that had once been Marcus's alone. And through it all, Marcus and Grasha remained the center, the foundation upon which everything was built. They had started with nothing, an exiled orc woman with a baby, a lonely farmer with an empty house. They had built everything. On a summer evening late in their lives, when Marcus's hair was white and Grasha's face was lined with the marks of long living, they sat together on the same porch where they had sat so many times before. Their children were grown and gone, living their own lives, but they visited often, and the house was never empty for long. "You regret it?" Grasha asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "All the difficulties we faced because you chose to marry an orc?" Marcus took her hand, his grip still strong despite the years. "Not for a single moment," he said. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me. This life we built is the best thing that ever happened to me. I would choose it again, 1,000 times over." Grasha squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with love and memory. "So would I," she said softly. "So would I." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. The farm stretched out around them, the fields green with summer growth, the animals settling for the night, everything peaceful and right. This was what they had built from nothing. This was the legacy of the day when Grasha had walked into Marcus's yard with nothing but her baby and her desperate hope. This was the proof that love could transcend blood and prejudice. That family was what you made it. That courage and kindness could overcome anything the world threw at you. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Marcus and Grasha remained on the porch, hands clasped, hearts full, surrounded by the life they had built together. They had started with nothing. They had built everything, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was perfect.